Good evening from Washington. I'm Ali Velshi in for Chris Hayes. Tonight, new reporting from the Washington Post on Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein's tearful plea to keep his job and the assurances that he gave the president during the Mueller probe. Plus, as the president spoke to the National Rifle Association, there was blockbuster new reporting on the absolute chaos happening inside one of the nation's most powerful lobbying groups. We'll have that incredible story ahead, but we begin the show with today's extremely dangerous rhetoric from the President of the United States. Donald Trump inflaming his supporters before an adoring audience at the NRA, effectively characterizing Robert Mueller and members of the U.S. intelligence community as traitors intent on staging a coup.
They tried for a coup, didn't work out so well. And I didn't need a gun for that one, did I? Corruption at the highest level, a disgrace. Spying, surveillance, trying for an overthrow. And we caught him. We caught him.
That is the President of the United States suggesting that those engaged in legitimate oversight and investigation which found significant wrongdoing and potentially impeachable offenses are traitors who are attempting to illegitimately overthrow the government. But that wasn't it. While criticizing the Mueller investigation, Trump defended a man who led an actual armed revolt against this nation, Robert E. Lee. Now, let me provide the context. You'll recall that yesterday, in announcing that he was entering the presidential race, Joe Biden cited Trump's defense of white nationalists who marched in Charlottesville, saying Trump's words helped him understand that we are in, quote, a battle for the soul of this nation. Asked about his Charlottesville comments, Trump made it crystal clear which side of that battle he stands on.
Mr. President, do you still think there were very fine people on both sides of Charlotte?
Oh, I've answered that question, and if you look at what I said, you will see that that question was answered perfectly. And I was talking about people that went because they felt very strongly about the monument to Robert E. Lee, a great general, whether you like it or not. He was one of the great generals. I've spoken to many generals here, right at the White House, and many people thought of the generals, they think that he was maybe their favorite general. People were there protesting the taking down of the monument of Robert E. Lee. Everybody knows that.
Robert E. Lee, the man Trump holds in such high esteem, tried to destroy this nation. As Adam Serwer writes, the Confederate commander was, quote, responsible for the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans in defense of the South's authority to own millions of human beings as property because they are black. And as for white nationalists in Charlottesville that Trump continues to defend, this is them. They had a march. They had a much larger agenda than simply defending a statue of Robert E. Lee.
Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Blood and soil! Blood and soil! Blood and soil!
May have been hard to hear that at the end. They were chanting blood and soil. Blood and soil. Blood and soil has a very specific meaning. It's a Nazi rallying cry. These are the so-called fine people that Trump continues to defend.
But not all of those people were neo-Nazis, believe me. Not all of those people were white supremacists by any stretch. And you had some very bad people in that group. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue.
All right, let's discuss the president's comments. Joining me, Sherrilyn Ifill, the president and director counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, and the Reverend Al Sharpton, host of MSNBC's Politics Nation and founder and president of the National Action Network. Thank you to both of you for being here. Sherrilyn, the president earlier today said that he answered that question perfectly. It could be right. He could have answered it perfectly because he does not seem to be making a mistake about what he intends to say about those demonstrators, those marchers at Charlottesville. He seems to be very clear on the fact that they, in his opinion, constitute a group of very fine people.
Well, Ali, it's really important that we not get sucked into this game that the president tries to play. This is now 2 years after 2017, and we were certain in August 2017 that the president knew exactly what he was saying and said what he wanted to say. As you'll recall, he had 3 different opportunities over the course of about 48 hours, and each time he doubled down on his belief that there were very fine people on both sides, many fine people, and he insisted on characterizing the Unite the Right Nazi rally as a rally about, as though it were a rally of the Charlottesville Historical Society, interested or interested in the military tactics and acumen of Robert E. Lee. And that's why we have to not get distracted with the conversation about General Lee and the Civil War. We know what that rally was about. The people who sought the permit were white supremacists. We saw what they said. We saw what the Tiki Torch March looked like, the idea that somehow there was a quiet protest that evening. Those were the words that the president used. So he knew exactly what he was saying. We're here 2 years later, and Ali, in intervening 2 years, we've had the president's actions to confirm that he knew exactly what he was saying. And so actually what he said today in some ways was even worse, because he now knows that there are people who listen to what he says, and some of them are violent. We know about the Coast Guard lieutenant. We know about the man who was planting the pipe bombs and targeting people, including people on this network, who he regarded as enemies of the president. So he knows that his words have this kind of power. He knows that there is an element out there that is following him, and yet he still makes these comments. But more importantly, his policies are consistent with his words.
Not only that, but Reverend Al, the president today at the NRA expanded on that. He talked about a coup, an attempted overthrow, how we beat them. So there's an audience for his language, his rhetoric, and that rhetoric, Rev Al, you'll know is familiar. It is rhetoric we have seen around the world, usually from dictators. But the idea that legitimate interests who oppose the government are not legitimate, and they are trying to stage coups, and they are trying to overthrow the elected government of the United States.
First, we must understand he said what he meant, and he meant what he said. And his policies and how he has presided over this nation reflects that. When you can call traitors of people that are doing investigations on whether a foreign adversary interfered or in any way was part of trying to affect an American election, and you try and call them traitors while you praise a traitor who caused the death of hundreds of thousands of people that are of this country, and they were fighting for the right to keep blacks as property. They were fighting to overthrow the government, and even say that there are some generals that sat in the White House and said he was a fine general, like he was a general in the U.S. Army. He was a general in an overthrow the government, Confederate Army, Confederate government. Then we know we are really fighting not only for the soul of the country, but fighting for what the country is going to stand for. And I think that when you look at the fact that he is now facing the House of Representatives and he's saying, I'll defy them, which means he's really dealing with, we're not going to have co-equals of power, executive, legislative, and judicial branch. The president is now autocratic in his mind. I'm above all of that. When you put that all together, praising a traitor, calling legitimate investigators traitors, and then says, and I am not even going to answer you, I will fight to be an autocrat. Clearly, he is consistent with autocrats and dictators around the world in his train of thinking and his dangerous rhetoric.
But Sherrilyn, that is chilling. If that is true, for 2.5 years, we've known where Donald Trump stands on this stuff. But we know he's got a base of people who continue to believe the ideas that he puts forth. Now, when he exerts this autocratic authority, the idea that people who are summoned to Congress are not going to be allowed to go and testify before Congress, before a co-equal branch of government stated in Article 1 of the Constitution, at some point, it has to worry right-minded Americans who say we have seen this play out in history before, where law enforcement, media, and the judiciary were undermined by an official, a leader, and it leads to bad things.
Ali, I've studied and I've written about this. I've written about Nazi Germany. I've written about Rwanda. I've written about white supremacy here in the United States. We are at a very perilous moment in this country. And, you know, you intuitively say right-minded people have to stand up. But are they standing up? Are a majority of Americans standing up and fighting for this country? I've been calling out my own profession. There are wonderful lawyers, many of whom regularly appear on this network, who are speaking truth to power, who are speaking about the rule of law that undergirds our democracy, and who are recognizing that the president is not only himself dismissive and violative of the rule of law, but he is now encouraging and indeed demanding those who work for him to violate the rule of law as well. But my profession contains many lawyers, many of whom are very prominent in this country, who have been silent. And I really believe we are at the moment when, if not now, when? This president is making his intentions perfectly clear. He is demonstrating quite clearly his intention to defy the rule of law, that he believes that he is above the law. He is also grooming the population, his followers. He is grooming a set of people to believe what he says, to not understand what the rule of law is, to believe that he is a victim, and to believe that anyone who comes against him is part of a plot. This is extremely dangerous stuff. And I think that some people are thinking we're kind of automatically going to come out of this, that there's something inevitable about our ability to come out of this as a democracy. It is not inevitable. It requires each of us to stand up, to speak, and to demand that the president comply with the law.
It is not, Rev Al, inevitable that we come out of it, and it is not inevitable that we do not slip deeper into this. Sherilyn mentions Rwanda, a perfect example of a place in which authority was undermined and incorrect messages, hateful messages, racist messages were spread through the media. 1933 Germany looked very similar. These are examples in which people thought, you can't really, society's not going to come apart because of the nonsense of a rhetorical, of rhetoric from a leader. But, Rev Al, you've seen it. It does.
I've seen it. I went to Rwanda. I saw it firsthand. And let me say, the real danger is that we are normalizing this rather than really saying that we are at a moment where this country is going to decide not on a new president, but whether the presidency becomes an autocratic leader. We are talking about whether or not we redefine how this country is, in fact, enforced in terms of its laws, and whether we have an chief executive that has all consuming power at his discretion, and he alone will make that decision. So we keep acting as if we're in a normal election. We're really selecting what kind of government we're moving forward when you have someone as blatant as this that will come and praise traitors and normalize people talking about Jews will not replace us and using blood and soil, Nazi terms, in open and public in the media. I think that we really need to understand where we are in history, and we must stand up. If there are right-minded American people, the majority of them need to stand up, not only from the legal profession, but all the way across the board, whatever profession, because the future of this nation is at stake.
Reverend Al, the future of the nation is at stake. Well said. Sherilyn, thank you for joining us tonight. Rev Al, thank you as well.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.